Cynthia Robinson placed the tiny gold swallow necklace on the glass counter with trembling fingers. "I only need enough to keep my daughter from losing our apartment," she whispered. Outside the shop window, 8-year-old Ava hugged her faded backpack, folding another little paper bird while waiting for her mother. The jeweler carefully opened the pendant to inspect it, then suddenly froze. Inside was a faded photograph of himself, holding a smiling young Cynthia more than a decade earlier. He looked through the window at the little girl, his voice barely audible. "How old is your daughter? Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. I'd love to know who's sharing this story with us today. And if heartfelt stories about hope and second chances mean something to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one." The alarm on Cynthia Robinson's second-hand phone buzzed at exactly 4:30 every morning, though she had rarely slept more than 4 hours. She reached over before it could wake Ava and silenced it with practiced speed. The apartment was still wrapped in darkness, except for the pale orange glow from the parking lot outside, where a flickering street lamp had been waiting for repairs longer than anyone in the building could remember. She sat up slowly, rubbing the stiffness from her shoulders. 12 years of lifting flour sacks, carrying baking trays, and standing through overnight shifts had left quiet reminders in her back and wrists. There was no time to think about them. She slipped into an old gray sweatshirt, tied her curls beneath a scarf, and walked barefoot into the tiny kitchen. The refrigerator hummed louder than it cooled. Inside were a carton of eggs, half a gallon of milk, a stick of butter, and a container holding leftover vegetable soup. Cynthia smiled anyway. "It'll get us through today," she whispered. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan, while slices of bread browned in a small toaster that needed an extra push before it worked. As coffee brewed, she opened a notebook covered with flower fingerprints and bent corners. Every page was filled with careful handwriting. Rent $1.860. Saved $1.143. Needed $717. Electric bill due next Tuesday. Bus pass for Ava. Groceries. Every dollar had a destination before it even reached her hands. She drew a small line beneath yesterday's numbers and sighed. No matter how carefully she planned, the math refused to change. A soft yawn came from the bedroom. "Mom." "I'm making breakfast, sweetheart." 8-year-old Ava Robinson appeared wearing oversized pajamas covered in tiny stars. Her hair was a beautiful cloud of curls that never seemed to obey a brush for more than 5 minutes. She smiled the kind of smile that somehow survived everything life handed them. "Is today muffin day?" Cynthia laughed. "It depends." "On what?" "Whether Mrs. Miller burns another batch," Ava giggled. Grace Miller, the owner of Riverside Bakery, believed nothing should ever be wasted. Whenever a tray of blueberry muffins came out slightly too dark, or croissants lost their perfect shape, she quietly packed them into boxes for employees to take home. To Ava, they tasted better than any bakery downtown. While eating breakfast, Ava reached into her backpack and pulled out a sheet of blue paper. Within seconds, tiny fingers folded it with surprising precision. Fold, turn, press. Another fold. Cynthia watched without saying a word. Another paper bird. Her daughter had been making them since kindergarten. Whenever something went wrong, whenever Cynthia looked worried, whenever the apartment felt too quiet, Ava folded birds. The little creations were everywhere, on the windowsill, beside the television, inside kitchen drawers. One even hung from fishing line near the window, gently spinning whenever fresh air slipped through the cracked frame. "What color is this one?" Cynthia asked. "Sky blue?" "And where's it flying?" Ava looked toward the ceiling as if she could actually see it. "Home." The answer made Cynthia pause. What if it gets lost? Ava smiled. Birds always know how to come back. Cynthia swallowed the sudden tightness in her throat. I hope you're right. Before leaving, she reached beneath her shirt and touched the tiny gold swallow necklace resting against her skin. She did that every morning. Not because it was expensive, because it wasn't. Its true value had nothing to do with gold. The little bird had once belonged to Evelyn Robinson, her mother. When Cynthia turned 21, Evelyn had fastened it around her daughter's neck and kissed her forehead. This bird isn't meant to remind you where you've been, her mother had said softly. It's meant to remind you that hope always knows the way home. After Evelyn passed away from cancer 2 years later, Cynthia had never taken the necklace off. Not once. Rain or sunshine. Birthdays. Hospital visits. Long nights crying after Ava was asleep. The swallow stayed close to her heart. She adjusted it beneath her uniform before walking Ava to Lincoln Elementary School. The 2-mile walk had become another daily ritual after Cynthia sold her old sedan the previous winter to pay medical bills. They talked about spelling tests, about science class, about a squirrel that Ava insisted recognized her every morning. Children ran laughing across the schoolyard while parents hurried toward work. Before entering the building, Ava hugged her mother tightly. You look tired. I'm okay. You said that yesterday. And I'm saying it today. Ava looked at her carefully. You smile with your mouth when you're tired? What about when I'm happy? You smile with your eyes. Cynthia laughed despite herself. You notice too much. I learned from you. She kissed Ava's forehead. I'll see you after school. Love you. Always. As Cynthia turned away, Ava called after her. Don't forget to eat lunch this time. I won't. It was a promise Cynthia already knew she might break. Riverside Bakery smelled of butter, cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread before sunrise. Customers loved the warmth. They never saw the exhaustion hidden behind every loaf. Grace Miller handed Cynthia an apron. Morning? Morning. You look pale. I've had better weeks. Grace hesitated. We've had fewer orders this month. Cynthia nodded before Grace even finished. I know. I'm sorry, Cynthia, I can't offer overtime. It's okay. But it wasn't. Every missing hour meant another $20 she wouldn't earn. Every $20 mattered. She spent the next 8 hours kneading dough, decorating cakes, washing mixing bowls, and greeting customers with the same gentle smile. No one guessed that while recommending birthday cupcakes, she was silently calculating whether she could postpone buying laundry detergent until next week. Near closing time, Grace quietly handed her a small paper bag. A few misshapen cinnamon rolls. You don't have to. I know. Cynthia accepted them anyway. On the walk home, the smell filled the cool afternoon air. She imagined Ava's excitement. That thought alone made the bag feel lighter. The apartment hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old paint. As she reached her door, an envelope lay on the welcome mat. Her stomach tightened before she even picked it up. She recognized the logo immediately. Dawson Property Management. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Final notice. Outstanding rent $717. Payment required within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in eviction proceedings. Cynthia read the letter twice, then a third time. The words blurred, not because she didn't understand them, because she understood them perfectly. Ava ran from the bedroom holding another freshly folded paper bird. Mom, look. This one has bigger wings. Cynthia quickly folded the notice in half before her daughter could read it. It's beautiful. Do you think it'll fly farther? Cynthia forced a smile, though her heart had already begun sinking beneath the weight of 72 impossible hours. She looked down at the little swallow necklace resting beneath her shirt, unaware that before those 3 days were over, it would become the only thing standing between losing a treasured memory and keeping a roof over her daughter's head. Long before Cynthia Robinson learned how to stretch a paycheck or hide worry behind a gentle smile, she was simply a 20-year-old student carrying flour on her sleeves and impossible dreams in her heart. She first met Marcus Ellison on a rainy September afternoon at Cincinnati Technical Institute. The culinary department and the horology workshop shared the same aging brick building separated by one long hallway that always smelled like coffee machine oil and fresh bread. Cynthia was hurrying to class with 2 bags of flour balanced awkwardly in her arms when one of them split open. A white cloud exploded across the hallway. Students laughed as flour covered the polished floor. Cynthia knelt immediately, trying to gather what little she could save with trembling hands. "I can't believe I just did that," she muttered. A pair of worn leather work boots stopped beside her. "Don't move." She looked up. A tall young man with warm brown eyes and rolled-up denim sleeves had already disappeared into another room. He returned carrying a dustpan, a broom, and several empty containers. "We can still save most of it," he said. Most people would have walked around the mess. Marcus Ellison knelt beside her without caring that flour covered his jeans. For nearly 15 minutes, they worked together in silence. When they finally stood, both looked as though they had been caught in a snowstorm. Cynthia laughed first. Marcus followed. It was the easiest laugh either of them had shared in weeks. "I'm Marcus." "Cynthia." He extended a flour-covered hand. She shook it. "Nice to officially meet my partner in disaster." That became their first inside joke. Over the following months, they crossed paths almost every day. Marcus studied precision, tiny gears, pocket watches, handmade clocks. His father, Walter Ellison, had repaired watches for nearly 40 years and dreamed that his son would someday preserve the nearly forgotten craft. Cynthia studied baking. Bread fascinated her. She loved that flour water yeast, and patience could become something that made strangers smile. Whenever classes ended, Marcus often waited outside the culinary lab. He claimed he happened to be walking the same direction. Neither of them believed that excuse after the 3rd week. One evening he appeared carrying a paper cup. "I heard you skip dinner." "I don't." "You do." "I just eat later." "So, later starts now." He handed her a bowl of homemade tomato soup in a thermos his father had insisted he borrow. "It isn't much. It smells amazing." "My dad says soup fixes more problems than advice." She smiled. "Your dad sounds wise." "He mostly sounds hungry." Their friendship slowly settled into something deeper. No grand confessions, no dramatic moments. Just ordinary kindness repeated so often that one day they realized they couldn't imagine life without each other. Saturday mornings became theirs. They visited flea markets, searching for antique kitchen tools and broken clocks. Marcus loved objects that other people overlooked. "So many people throw things away just because they stop working," he said once while examining an old pocket watch. "And you?" "I like proving they still have another life," Cynthia answered quietly. "I think people deserve that too." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." By spring, Walter Ellison knew exactly what was happening. One afternoon, he invited Cynthia into his tiny workshop behind the family home. Every shelf overflowed with clocks in different stages of repair. Some ticked softly, others waited silently for patient hands. Walter smiled as Marcus nervously pretended to organize tools. "My son has been making something." Marcus looked embarrassed. "Dad? You've spent 3 months hiding it." Walter chuckled. She deserves to see. Marcus opened a small wooden box. Inside rested a delicate gold pendant shaped like a swallow in flight. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't covered in diamonds. Its beauty came from careful craftsmanship. Every feather had been engraved by hand. The wings curved upward as though the bird had just caught a warm current of wind. Cynthia stared without speaking. You made this, Marcus nodded. Every evening after class. She carefully lifted it into her palm. It's beautiful. There is one more thing. Marcus turned the pendant over. Near the tail of the bird was an almost invisible engraving, a tiny compass. Only someone looking closely would ever notice it. What does it mean? Marcus smiled shyly. My father says swallows always know how to find home. Walter added softly, even after the longest winters. Marcus fastened the necklace around Cynthia's neck. His fingers shook. So, whenever life gets confusing, he hesitated, remember that I'll always find my way back to you. Cynthia reached up to touch the little bird resting against her heart. I'll hold you to that promise. Walter pretended to examine another clock, giving the young couple a little privacy. But he couldn't hide his smile. The months that followed felt wonderfully ordinary. Marcus often delivered fresh bread Cynthia had baked to elderly neighbors whose children rarely visited. Cynthia helped Walter organize invoices because his eyesight had begun to weaken. They celebrated birthdays with homemade pies instead of expensive dinners. On Sunday afternoons, they sat beside the Ohio River, watching real swallows skim across the water. Sometimes they barely spoke. They didn't need to. Silence felt comfortable together. One evening, Marcus unfolded a sheet of notebook paper. I've been thinking. Dangerous. I know. She laughed. What now? I want to open a workshop one day. You will. And you. What about me? You'll own the bakery next door. She smiled. Next door. So I can steal warm cinnamon rolls every morning. You mean buy? I said what I said. She bumped his shoulder playfully. And if we fail, Marcus looked toward the river, where dozens of swallows circled in the fading sunlight. Then we'll fail together. Cynthia believed him completely. There wasn't a trace of doubt in her heart. Not because life had always been kind, but because Marcus had never once given her a reason to question his word. Neither of them could imagine that within a few short months, a sudden illness, unanswered letters, and one cruel twist of fate would unravel every promise they had made beneath that autumn sky. For now the swallow pendant rested warmly against Cynthia's chest, carrying a promise that still felt unbreakable. A promise both of them believed would last forever. The phone call came on a cold Thursday morning in late November. Marcus Ellison had just finished polishing the brass casing of an antique pocket watch when his cell phone rang. He smiled when he saw his father's number, expecting another lecture about cleaning his workbench or remembering to eat breakfast. Instead, he heard a stranger's voice. Is this Marcus Ellison? Yes. This is St. Elizabeth Medical Center. Your father collapsed at his workshop about 30 minutes ago. Everything else became a blur. Walter Ellison had suffered a severe stroke while repairing an old grandfather clock. Although doctors stabilized him, they warned Marcus that recovery would be long and uncertain. The nearest rehabilitation program that accepted Walter's insurance was nearly 300 miles away in Lexington, Kentucky. Marcus packed a suitcase that same evening. Before leaving, he stood outside Cynthia's apartment building, with the swallow pendant's empty wooden box still in his coat pocket. She had an evening baking class and wouldn't be home until late. He wrote a note. My dad needs me. I'll come back as soon as I can. I'll call every night. He slipped it beneath her door and drove through the rain before sunrise. He had no idea the note would never reach her. The building's maintenance worker collected several loose papers from the hallway after a leaking pipe flooded part of the corridor that night. Water had soaked envelopes, advertisements, and Marcus's handwritten message alike. Without knowing its importance, he threw everything into a trash bag. The first thread connecting two lives had quietly disappeared. For the next several weeks, Marcus divided every day between the hospital and his father's rehabilitation center. Walter struggled to speak. His once steady hands shook uncontrollably. The man who had spent 4 decades repairing tiny watch gears could no longer button his own shirt. Marcus fed him soup, helped him walk, read newspaper headlines aloud. At night, he called Cynthia. Every call went unanswered. Sometimes it rang until voicemail. Sometimes it disconnected immediately. He left message after message. "Cynthia, it's me. I just wanted to hear your voice. I'll be home soon. I miss you." No reply ever came. Unknown to Marcus, Cynthia had changed apartments only days after he left. The old building had been condemned because of mold damage, forcing every tenant to move with less than a week's notice. She had also changed her phone carrier after falling behind on payments. Marcus's messages disappeared into a number that no longer belonged to her. Meanwhile, Cynthia waited beside her own silent phone. Every morning she checked for missed calls. Every evening she stared at the apartment door, expecting Marcus to knock with that familiar, crooked smile. Weeks passed. Nothing. She tried calling him. The number had been disconnected. She visited the small workshop where Marcus used to apprentice. The windows were dark. A handwritten sign simply read, "Closed until further notice." No forwarding address, no explanation. Only silence. Just before Christmas, Cynthia began feeling unusually tired. At first, she blamed the long hours at culinary school and her part-time bakery job. Then came the nausea, the dizziness. The morning she nearly fainted while carrying a tray of bread, her instructor insisted she visit a clinic. She sat alone in the examination room, twisting the swallow pendant between her fingers. The nurse returned with a gentle smile. "Congratulations." Cynthia blinked. "I'm sorry." "You're pregnant." The room became impossibly quiet. She thanked the nurse automatically, walked outside, and sat on a bench covered with melting snow. For nearly an hour, she simply watched people pass. A young father lifted his laughing toddler onto his shoulders. An elderly couple shared a scarf against the cold. A delivery driver rushed past carrying flowers. Life continued moving while hers seemed suspended between joy and fear. That evening, she wrote Marcus a letter. Not 1 page, 7. She explained everything. The baby, the doctor's appointment, how frightened she was, how much she loved him. She folded every page carefully and mailed the envelope to the only address she had for Walter's rehabilitation center. Days later, the letter arrived. But Marcus never saw it. Walter's condition had suddenly worsened, and he had been transferred to another medical facility, 2 counties away. Mail sent to the first center was returned weeks later, mixed with dozens of redirected documents. By the time the envelope finally reached the Ellison family home months afterward, it had already been marked undeliverable. Another bridge collapsed before either of them realized it had existed. Winter gave way to spring. Marcus remained in Kentucky longer than anyone expected. Walter slowly learned to walk again with a cane, but recovery demanded constant care. Marcus found temporary work repairing watches at a jewelry store to pay medical expenses. One rainy evening, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, he drove home along a narrow country road. A pickup truck lost control around a curve. Marcus swerved instinctively. His car slammed into a guardrail before spinning into a ditch. When he regained consciousness in the hospital, his left arm was in a cast. 3 ribs were fractured. His phone had shattered beyond repair. Along with it disappeared every photograph, every saved voicemail, every contact number, including Cynthia's. The months that followed blurred together through surgeries, physical therapy work, and caring for Walter. Each time Marcus searched for Cynthia online or called old classmates, he found nothing. Eventually, painful questions began replacing hopeful ones. Had she changed her mind? Had she met someone else? Had she decided their future together wasn't worth waiting for? He hated himself for thinking it. Yet the silence offered no other answers. Back in Cincinnati, Cynthia fought a different battle. She completed culinary school while pregnant, worked double shifts whenever she could, attended doctor's appointments alone. When labor began 8 months later, Grace Miller drove her to the hospital because there was no one else to call. Hours later, Cynthia held her newborn daughter against her chest. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped instinctively around the gold swallow pendant hanging from her mother's neck. Tears streamed down Cynthia's face, not because Marcus wasn't there, but because she realized she could no longer spend her life waiting for a door that never opened. Looking down at her sleeping daughter, she whispered the name she had chosen weeks earlier. Ava. Then she kissed the baby's forehead and made a promise only the two of them could hear. No matter who stays or who leaves, you'll always know you were loved from the very beginning. She believed Marcus had chosen to disappear. Marcus believed Cynthia had walked away. Neither knew that fate, not love, had stolen 10 irreplaceable years from them both. The final notice stayed folded inside Cynthia Robinson's notebook, but she didn't need to read it again. Every number printed on that page had already carved itself into her memory. 72 hours. $717. After dropping Ava at school the next morning. Cynthia stood outside Lincoln Elementary for a few extra seconds, watching children disappear through the front doors. She waited until Ava turned around one last time to wave before forcing herself to smile. The moment the doors closed, her expression changed. She had exactly one goal for the day: find the missing money. At Riverside Bakery, the ovens were already roaring when she arrived. The comforting smell of cinnamon and butter usually made the long shifts easier, but that morning even the familiar warmth couldn't quiet the anxiety sitting heavily in her chest. Grace Miller noticed immediately. "You didn't sleep." "I slept enough." "Cynthia." "I'm fine." Grace folded her arms. "You only say I'm fine when things are definitely not fine." Cynthia tried to laugh, but it came out as little more than an exhausted breath. Grace led her into the tiny office behind the kitchen. "Tell me." For a long moment, Cynthia simply stared at the floor. Then she handed Grace the eviction notice. Grace read every line carefully before placing it back on the desk. "I wish I had the money." "I know. I could advance next week's paycheck." "It wouldn't even cover half." Grace nodded sadly. The bakery had been struggling for months. Rising ingredient costs had forced her to reduce everyone's hours. She wasn't hiding money from Cynthia. She genuinely didn't have it. "I'll figure something out," Cynthia said. Grace looked unconvinced. "You always do." "I have to." The morning rush left little time to think. Customers ordered birthday cakes, fresh sourdough, and coffee before work. Cynthia greeted every person with the same patient kindness she always offered, even while calculating numbers in the back of her mind. If she skipped groceries for another week, if she postponed the electric bill, if she sold the microwave, none of it would be enough. During her lunch break, she began making phone calls. The first was to the small credit union where she had kept a savings account for years. "I'm sorry," the loan officer explained gently. "Your current income doesn't qualify." "I've never missed a payment before." "I know, Miss Robinson. I only need a small personal loan." "I truly wish I could help." The answer was still no. Her second call was to a community assistance program. Funding had already been exhausted for the month. The third organization placed her on a waiting list nearly 6 weeks long. She thanked every person politely before hanging up. Not one of them had done anything wrong. There were simply too many families needing help. After work, Cynthia walked 3 blocks to a neighborhood thrift store carrying a small box. Inside were the few things she believed she could live without. An old coffee maker, a winter coat she rarely wore, a pair of ceramic bowls her mother had once painted. The owner examined everything carefully. "I can offer $90. Cynthia had hoped for at least twice that amount. She accepted anyway. On the way home, she stopped at an ATM and deposited every dollar. The balance still fell hundreds short. That evening, Ava spread colored paper across the kitchen table. "What are you making?" Cynthia asked. "A whole flock." "A flock? So the blue bird won't get lonely." Cynthia watched as tiny fingers folded another swallow with complete concentration. "You really love making these?" Ava nodded. "They're brave." "Brave? They fly really far." She looked up. "But they always come back." Cynthia reached over and gently smoothed a loose curl away from Ava's face. "I hope some things really do." After dinner, she searched every cabinet drawer and storage box in the apartment. She found loose coins beneath couch cushions, unused gift cards with only a few dollars remaining, a forgotten emergency envelope containing $43. Every discovery felt like a tiny victory. By midnight, she had added another $81 to the notebook. Still not enough. The following morning brought another setback. When Cynthia climbed into her aging sedan, the engine coughed twice before falling silent. She tried again. Nothing. Again. Only a grinding sound. A neighbor named Mr. Alvarez came outside carrying his toolbox. "Battery? I replaced it 6 months ago." He checked beneath the hood for several minutes before closing it with a sigh. "Transmission." Cynthia closed her eyes. "Can it wait?" "It already has. Repair estimates would easily exceed $1,000. She thanked him anyway. Instead of driving to work, she walked, nearly 4 miles. The October wind grew colder with every block, but she kept moving. Each step became another reminder that life seemed determined to collect payment from every direction at once. Late that afternoon, another letter arrived. This one wasn't slipped beneath the door. Mrs. Helen Dawson knocked personally. The property manager stood quietly in the hallway holding a clipboard against her chest. "I wanted to make sure you received the notice." "I did." Helen hesitated. "I know you're trying." Cynthia appreciated the honesty. "I am. I've extended deadlines before." "I remember. But the bank has started foreclosure proceedings on this building." Cynthia looked up. "What?" "I don't have as much control as people think." For the first time, Cynthia saw exhaustion behind Helen's professional appearance. "If tenants don't pay, I can't make the mortgage." Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Finally, Helen sighed. "I wish circumstances were different." "So do I." After Helen left, Cynthia locked the door and leaned against it. She didn't cry. She simply stood there listening to the apartment silence. Then Ava walked into the living room carrying the blue paper swallow she had folded days earlier. "I made something for you." Cynthia accepted it. On one wing, written in careful, childish handwriting, were 5 simple words: "For when you're feeling scared." Cynthia smiled through eyes that had finally begun to fill with tears. That night after Ava had fallen asleep, Cynthia opened the small wooden jewelry box she had avoided touching for years. Inside was nothing except one soft velvet cloth. Resting at its center lay the gold swallow necklace. Moonlight from the window reflected gently across its tiny wings. She picked it up with both hands, remembering her mother's smile, Marcus's promise, and every year that had passed since. It was the only valuable thing she still owned, the only piece of her past she had refused to let go. She closed her fingers around it. For the first time in more than a decade, a painful thought entered her mind. Maybe memories could not keep a child warm. Maybe love alone could not pay rent. And maybe the little swallow that had stayed so faithfully close to her heart was now asking to help her in the only way it still could. Marcus Ellison unlocked the front door of Ellison Timepieces every morning at exactly 8:15. Not because customers arrived that early. Most didn't appear until after 10. He came early because his father had spent 40 years telling him the same sentence every morning. If you respect time, people will trust you with theirs. Even after Walter Ellison had passed away 3 years earlier, Marcus still couldn't bring himself to change the routine. The little bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The shop was narrow but inviting. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, falling across rows of antique clocks, restored wristwatches, handcrafted jewelry, and wooden display cases polished so often that they reflected the room like calm water. Nothing inside looked expensive for the sake of showing wealth. Everything looked loved. Marcus switched on the lamps one by one before winding the large grandfather clock standing in the corner. The familiar ticking slowly filled the room. People often joked that his store was the quietest place in Cincinnati. Marcus secretly liked that reputation. Silence had become a companion he understood. He brewed a small pot of coffee, then unlocked the workshop behind the showroom. This was his favorite place in the building. The workbench still held tiny scratches, made by Walter decades earlier. Old tools hung neatly on the wall exactly where his father had left them. Magnifying lenses, fine engraving needles, tiny screwdrivers, jeweler's hammers worn smooth from years of use. Marcus had replaced broken equipment many times. He had never moved the tools. It felt wrong. Before beginning work, he reached into the top drawer and removed a weathered leather notebook. Inside were hundreds of hand-drawn jewelry designs, wedding bands, pocket watch engravings, necklaces, lockets, and among them, pressed carefully between two protective sheets, was the original sketch of a swallow with its wings spread wide. His fingertips rested on the page. "I still remember every line," he murmured. The bird had been one of the first pieces he had ever designed without his father's help. Walter had corrected almost nothing. "You finally stopped making jewelry with your hands," his father had said. "You started making it with your heart." Marcus closed the notebook gently. There were mornings when he wondered whether Cynthia still had the necklace. There were other mornings when he forced himself not to wonder at all. The bell over the front door rang. An elderly woman entered carrying a small velvet pouch. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison." "Morning, Mrs. Harris." She smiled warmly. "My husband's watch stopped again." Marcus laughed. "No, it didn't." "No, it misses you." She rolled her eyes playfully. "You tell that joke every time." "And every time you laugh." She handed him the old silver watch. It had belonged to her late husband, a firefighter who had passed away nearly 15 years earlier. Marcus examined it under the magnifying lamp. The repair would normally cost nearly $100. Instead, he cleaned the movement, replaced a worn spring, polished the crystal, and handed it back 30 minutes later. "How much?" Mrs. Harris asked. Marcus shook his head. "It's already been paid for." She frowned. "By whom?" "By a man who wanted his wife to keep smiling." Mrs. Harris understood immediately. Her eyes filled with tears. "You remind me of your father." Marcus smiled softly. "I hope that's a compliment." "It always is." After she left his assistant, Noah Bennett leaned against the doorway. "You do realize that's the 4th free repair this week?" Marcus shrugged. "She lives alone." So some things are worth more than invoices." Noah laughed. "You'll never be rich." Marcus looked around the quiet workshop. I've never been trying to be. Business was steady, comfortable, enough to pay employees fairly and keep the lights on. Marcus could have expanded years ago. Several investors had offered partnerships. A national jewelry chain once proposed buying his designs. He refused every offer. Walter had built the workshop to restore memories, not manufacture luxury. Marcus intended to honor that. Near lunchtime, he walked to the neighborhood diner across the street. The waitress already knew his order. Turkey sandwich, black coffee, apple slices instead of fries. You really never change, she teased. Marcus smiled. I save surprises for important things. She placed the plate on the table. Still eating alone? I suppose. You should let someone fix that. He chuckled politely. The conversation ended there. People often assumed Marcus had chosen solitude because he loved his work too much. The truth was more complicated. He had tried dating a few times after returning to Cincinnati. Every relationship ended the same way. At some point, someone would ask about his past, about the woman who had broken his heart. Marcus never spoke badly about Cynthia. He simply admitted that part of him had never understood what had happened. Most people eventually realized there was still someone occupying the quietest room in his heart. They left kindly. He never blamed them. That evening, after closing the shop, Marcus drove to Evergreen Cemetery, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Walter's grave sat beneath a maple tree whose leaves had already begun turning gold. Marcus brushed away a few fallen leaves before placing the flowers down. I finally restored the Harrison clock today, the breeze answered with soft rustling. Mrs. Harris brought cookies again. He smiled faintly. You were right about her. After a pause, his voice grew quieter. I still think about her. He didn't say Cynthia's name. He never had to. I keep wondering whether I should have searched harder. He lowered his eyes. Maybe I gave up too soon. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening to birds singing somewhere beyond the rows of gravestones. Finally, he sighed. I hope life was kind to her. As he turned to leave, something caught his attention. A swallow landed briefly on the top edge of Walter's headstone. It stayed only a few seconds before lifting effortlessly into the evening sky. Marcus watched until it disappeared beyond the trees. He smiled sadly. You always liked those birds. Driving home, he had no way of knowing that only a few miles away, Cynthia Robinson was sitting alone at her kitchen table, holding the very swallow pendant he had created with his own hands more than a decade earlier. He also couldn't imagine that within 48 hours, the little jewelry shop he opened every morning with such quiet routine would become the place where two lives separated by years of silence and heartbreaking misunderstanding would finally cross again. Cynthia Robinson barely slept that night. The little gold swallow rested in her palm long after midnight while the apartment around her settled into silence. Every scratch on the pendant had a memory attached to it. Some memories belonged to her mother. Others belonged to a young man whose voice had once made the future seem wonderfully simple. She closed the pendant carefully and laid it back on the velvet cloth. I can't, she whispered. The words echoed through the empty kitchen. She stood, turned off the light, walked toward the bedroom, then stopped halfway. Her eyes drifted back to the jewelry box. She returned, picked up the necklace again, and held it against her heart. I can't. But this time the sentence sounded less certain. The following morning arrived gray and unusually cold. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while Cynthia prepared oatmeal before school. Ava noticed immediately that her mother seemed distracted. You forgot the cinnamon. What? The oatmeal. Cynthia looked down. Ava was right. She laughed quietly and sprinkled cinnamon across both bowls. Guess my brain is still asleep. Ava tilted her head. You're thinking about the paper from yesterday. Cynthia paused. Children often noticed what adults tried hardest to hide. I'm thinking about a lot of things. Is it the apartment? Cynthia hesitated. She had never lied to her daughter. She wasn't about to begin now. It might be. Ava stirred her oatmeal for a moment. If we have to move. Cynthia reached across the table. We're going to do everything we can so that doesn't happen. But if it does, she smiled gently. We'll still be together. Ava nodded. Then we'll still be home. The answer almost broke Cynthia's heart. After breakfast, they walked through the chilly morning toward school. The old sedan still sat motionless in the parking lot with a handwritten note taped inside the windshield. Out of service. Repairing it was impossible. Replacing it was unthinkable. Halfway to school, they passed a small pond where several real swallows skimmed low across the water before disappearing beneath a bridge. Ava stopped walking. They came back. What did... The birds. Cynthia followed her gaze. They leave every year. But they always know where to return. Cynthia looked down at the necklace hidden beneath her sweater. I suppose they do. At school, Ava hugged her tightly. You'll figure it out. You sound very confident. I learned from you. As Ava disappeared inside the building, Cynthia stood there longer than usual. The confidence in her daughter's voice felt undeserved. She wasn't sure she could solve this one. Instead of walking directly to work, Cynthia changed direction. She headed toward St. Matthew's Church. The sanctuary was empty except for an elderly volunteer arranging flowers near the altar. Cynthia slipped quietly into the last pew. She wasn't asking for a miracle. She had stopped believing that life changed overnight. Instead, she prayed for something much smaller. Clarity, strength, enough courage to make the decision she had been avoiding. When she finally stood to leave, the volunteer smiled kindly. Everything all right? Cynthia answered honestly. I'm trying to do the right thing, the woman nodded. Sometimes the right thing hurts first. Those words stayed with Cynthia for the rest of the day. Her shift at Riverside Bakery passed in a blur of dough flour and smiling customers. Grace watched Cynthia closely. Near closing time, she approached with an envelope. I sold a wedding cake this morning. Cynthia looked confused. So? I can give everyone a small bonus. She handed Cynthia the envelope. Inside was $80. Cynthia's eyes filled immediately. Grace, it isn't much. It's groceries. It's something. Cynthia hugged her before either of them could say another word. On the walk home, she added the $80 to her notebook. Still short, still impossible. She stopped outside a pawn shop. People moved in and out, carrying guitars, tools, electronics, and jewelry. She stared through the window for nearly a minute. Then she shook her head. No. She turned away. That wasn't where she wanted the swallow to end up. She wanted someone who would understand craftsmanship. Someone who might even appreciate the history behind it. Back home, Ava had spread dozens of paper birds across the living room carpet. Blue, white, yellow. One tiny red bird sat by itself. What's that one? Ava picked it up. The leader. The leader! He helps all the others find home. Cynthia smiled. That's a big job. He doesn't have to carry them. Oh, what does he do? He flies first. The simplicity of the answer settled deeply inside Cynthia. That evening she cooked vegetable soup, using nearly everything left in the refrigerator. While eating, Ava suddenly asked, Can I see Grandma Evelyn's bird? Cynthia reached beneath her sweater and unclasped the necklace. She almost never removed it. Ava accepted it with extraordinary care. "It's prettier than I remember." "It was your grandmother's greatest treasure. Will it be mine one day?" Cynthia swallowed. "I always thought so." Ava studied the tiny swallow closely. "Grandma loved helping people, right?" "More than anything." "So," she looked up with innocent certainty, "wouldn't she want it to help us now?" The room fell completely silent. Cynthia couldn't answer, because deep inside, she already knew exactly what her mother would have said. People first, always. Jewelry second. After dinner, Ava carried her paper birds into the bedroom and fell asleep almost immediately. Cynthia remained at the kitchen table. The notebook, the eviction notice, the necklace. She arranged all three beside one another. It felt as though her entire life had been reduced to those objects, a promise, a debt, a choice. Slowly she opened the velvet cloth and traced the swallow's wings with her fingertip. Memories returned one after another. Marcus laughing with flour on his face. Walter teaching him to engrave tiny feathers. Her mother's gentle hands fastening the necklace around her neck years later after Marcus had disappeared, telling her that hope sometimes needed something to hold on to. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." She wasn't sure whether she was speaking to her mother, to Marcus, or to the younger version of herself that had believed some promises lasted forever. Early the next morning, before Ava woke up, Cynthia removed the swallow necklace from around her neck. For the first time in over 10 years, the space above her heart felt strangely empty. She wrapped the pendant carefully in the same velvet cloth, placed it inside its wooden box, and slipped it into her handbag. Then she looked at herself in the hallway mirror. Without the necklace, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. She took one slow breath, another, picked up her keys, locked the apartment door, and began walking toward the one jewelry shop in Cincinnati that still specialized in handcrafted pieces, never imagining that the man waiting behind its counter had spent the last decade wondering where she had gone. The bell above the entrance chimed softly as Cynthia Robinson stepped into Ellison timepieces. Warm light spilled across polished wooden floors, and the steady rhythm of dozens of ticking clocks filled the room with a strange sense of calm. The scent of cedar metal polish and freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. For a brief moment, Cynthia forgot why she had come. She hadn't expected a place like this. It didn't feel like a pawn shop. It felt like a room where people brought pieces of their lives, hoping someone could preserve them. A middle-aged couple stood near a display case examining wedding bands. An elderly man waited patiently beside the counter, holding a silver pocket watch wrapped in a handkerchief. Behind the workbench, Marcus Ellison adjusted the magnifying loupe over one eye while repairing a vintage wristwatch. Without looking up, he spoke warmly. "I'll be with you in just a minute." The voice stopped Cynthia's heart. Time folded in on itself. She knew that voice, even after 10 years, even after all the unanswered questions. She instinctively stepped backward, but another customer entered behind her, leaving no easy path to the door. Her breathing became shallow. No, it can't be. Marcus finally finished tightening the tiny screw inside the watch movement. He removed the loop and looked toward the front counter. For a split second, neither of them moved. The years had changed them both. Cynthia's face carried quiet exhaustion where youthful innocence had once lived. Marcus had silver beginning to appear near his temples, and the easy confidence of his 20s had been replaced by a calmer, gentler presence. Recognition did not come immediately. It arrived slowly, like sunrise. Marcus frowned ever so slightly. His eyes lingered. Something about the woman standing before him felt familiar, but memory remained just out of reach. "Good morning," he said professionally. "How can I help you?" Cynthia lowered her gaze. She couldn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she carefully placed the small wooden jewelry box onto the glass counter. Marcus opened it automatically. The tiny gold swallow rested against faded blue velvet. His hands froze. Every craftsman recognizes his own work, even decades later. His fingertips hovered above the pendant without touching it. Impossible. He lifted it gently. The weight, the shape, the tiny imperfections hidden beneath one wing. They were exactly where he remembered leaving them. His heartbeat quickened. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Cynthia's voice barely rose above a whisper. "It belonged to my mother." Marcus nodded slowly, still studying the necklace. "May I examine it?" She simply nodded. He carried it beneath the bright inspection lamp. Noah glanced over from another workbench. "Everything okay?" Marcus didn't answer. His full attention rested on the swallow. Near the tail feather, almost invisible beneath years of wear, lay the tiny engraved compass. The same compass Walter had suggested adding. The same compass Marcus had carved by hand one quiet Sunday afternoon. His pulse began pounding. He turned the pendant over. There, the nearly invisible seam. He had designed the swallow to open. Few people ever realized it wasn't a solid pendant. Marcus pressed gently with his thumbnail. Click. The swallow opened. Inside rested a tiny photograph, faded by years, but still recognizable. A young woman laughed at the camera while standing beside a smiling young man whose arm rested comfortably around her shoulders. Marcus forgot how to breathe. His own younger face stared back at him. Beside it, Cynthia, exactly as she had looked 10 years earlier. The room around him disappeared. Customers, clocks, voices. Everything faded beneath one overwhelming realization. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the woman standing silently across the counter. "Cynthia." She closed her eyes. For the first time in over a decade, hearing her own name in his voice felt both comforting and unbearably painful. Neither of them moved. Neither knew what words belonged in a moment like this. Finally, Marcus spoke. I thought..." "So did I." The unfinished sentences hung between them. No accusations, no explanations, only years of unanswered questions. Then, movement outside the front window caught Marcus's attention. A little girl sat on the wooden bench across the sidewalk. She wore a faded yellow jacket despite the cool autumn breeze. Her backpack rested beside her. She wasn't playing on a phone. Instead, she carefully folded a sheet of blue paper. Fold, turn, press, fold again. When she finished, she smiled proudly at the tiny paper swallow in her hands. Marcus couldn't explain why he kept looking. There was something strangely familiar about the child. The shape of her smile, the gentle curve of her cheeks. Then the girl looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him, warm brown eyes, exactly like his. He turned back toward Cynthia, his expression suddenly uncertain. "Your daughter?" Cynthia followed his gaze toward the window. "Yes." "What's her name?" "Ava." Marcus looked at the little girl again. His mind began doing impossible mathematics. 10 years? 8-year-old child? The timing? The necklace? The photograph? His voice grew almost inaudible. "How old is she?" "She turned 8 in May." The color drained from Marcus's face. 8. His knees nearly gave way. He placed one hand against the counter for support. His breathing became uneven. "No!" Cynthia didn't answer. She simply watched him. For years she had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. Anger, denial, confusion. She had never imagined complete silence. Marcus's eyes slowly returned to the photograph inside the pendant. then to Cynthia, then back to Ava, waiting patiently outside. The little girl waved cheerfully through the window, unaware that her life had just changed forever. Marcus raised his hand automatically and waved back. His fingers were trembling. He looked at Cynthia again. "Is she—" The question refused to leave his lips. Cynthia quietly finished it for him. "Yes." One simple word. Nothing more. Marcus closed the pendant carefully, as though afraid it might break beneath the weight of everything it now carried. 10 years of grief. 10 years of misunderstanding. 8 birthdays. 8 Christmas mornings. 8 first days of school. 8 years of bedtime stories told by someone else. He had missed them all, not because he hadn't cared, because he had never known. 1,000 memories he never had rushed through his mind like ghosts. His first time hearing her laugh, teaching her to ride a bicycle, holding her as a newborn, watching her take her first steps. Gone. Not stolen by betrayal, not stolen by indifference, stolen by silence. Outside, Ava finished folding another tiny paper swallow. She smiled at it before placing it carefully beside the first one on the bench. Inside the shop, Marcus stared through the glass at the little girl, unable to take his eyes off her. His voice finally returned, shaking with disbelief. "I need you to tell me everything." Cynthia looked at the clocks surrounding them. Everyone ticked steadily forward. Time had never stopped waiting for either of them. But perhaps after all these lost years, it had finally brought them back to the same place. For several long seconds, neither Cynthia Robinson nor Marcus Ellison spoke. The clocks around them continued their steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder now, as if every second carried the weight of the 10 years they had lost. Marcus finally looked toward Noah, who had quietly sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. "Could you cover the front for a while?" Noah glanced between the two of them, nodded once and locked the workshop door behind Marcus without asking a single question. Some stories deserved privacy. Marcus motioned toward a small room behind the workshop. "My office." Cynthia hesitated. "I need to bring Ava inside." "Of course." She stepped outside. Ava immediately stood up. "Mom, are we leaving already?" "Not yet, sweetheart." "Did they say no?" Cynthia forced a gentle smile. "No." "Then why are you crying?" Only then did Cynthia realize tears had quietly slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them away. "I just met someone I haven't seen in a very long time." Ava looked curiously through the shop window. "The nice man?" "Yes." "He waved at me." "I know. He looks kind." Cynthia swallowed. "He is. At least, he used to be." The thought remained unfinished. They walked back inside together. Marcus stood near the doorway, almost afraid to move. Seeing Ava only a few feet away felt unreal. She smiled politely. "Hi." His heart tightened. "Hi. I like your clocks." "Thank you. My teacher says clocks tell stories." Marcus smiled faintly. "Your teacher sounds very wise." Ava nodded proudly. "She is." Cynthia gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Sweetheart, would you mind sitting over there with some paper for a little while?" Noah quickly appeared carrying colored paper and pencils. "I think I saw someone making birds outside." Ava's eyes brightened. "You know how to make them." "No." She grinned. "I can teach you." Within moments, the little girl was happily folding paper at the front table. Marcus couldn't stop watching her. Even the way she tilted her head while concentrating reminded him painfully of Cynthia. He finally turned away before emotion overwhelmed him. The office was small. 1 wooden desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with repair manuals, a faded photograph of Walter Ellison standing proudly beside his first workshop. Marcus closed the door quietly. Neither sat immediately. "I don't know where to begin," Cynthia admitted. Marcus answered honestly. "Neither do I." Silence settled again. Then Cynthia reached into her purse. She removed a thick bundle tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Marcus frowned. "What is that?" "My letters." She untied the ribbon carefully. "I wrote to you." She handed him the first one. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the top was a date. December 3rd. Marcus unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Dear Marcus, your father must need you more than I do right now, and that's okay. I just wish I knew where you were. I keep waiting for your phone call." His vision blurred. He opened another. December 18th, another. January 9th. Then February. March. April. Every letter ended the same way. "Come home. I love you. Please let me know you're okay." Marcus's hands began shaking. "I never received these." "I know." "I swear to you." "I know." He looked up. "You believe me?" Cynthia nodded slowly. "I do now." Marcus lowered his face into his hands. "For 10 years, his voice cracked. "For 10 years I believed you stopped loving me." Cynthia's eyes filled again. "I believed exactly the same thing." Marcus stared at the stack of letters. So many. "I never stopped writing." "When did you stop?" "The day Ava was born." Marcus closed his eyes. His chest tightened. "You were pregnant." "Yes." "I didn't know." "I know." "I would have come." "I believe you." Those 4 words broke something inside him. Not because they erased the past. Because they proved Cynthia no longer needed revenge. She simply wanted the truth. Marcus stood and walked toward the office window. Outside, Ava laughed softly while showing Noah another paper bird. He watched every tiny movement. "She folds paper the way you knead bread." Cynthia smiled through her tears. "She says birds always know how to find home." Marcus almost laughed. "I used to say that." "I remember." He turned back. "Tell me about her." Cynthia's face softened immediately. "She loves science." Marcus listened carefully. "She hates peas." A tiny smile escaped him. "Smart girl." "She reads before bed every night." "What does she want to be?" "Last month she wanted to become an astronaut." "And now?" "A veterinarian." Marcus laughed quietly. "I missed all of that." Cynthia nodded. "You missed her first steps?" His smile disappeared. "You missed the day she learned to ride a bike." Another silence. "You missed her first piano recital." Marcus looked down. "I know." "But," she continued gently, "you didn't choose to." That sentence carried more mercy than Marcus believed he deserved. He opened another letter. Halfway through, he suddenly stopped. "What happened to your apartment?" "What do you mean?" "You wrote that you were moving because of mold." "We had to leave." Marcus stared at her. "That's why your phone." "I couldn't keep the same number." He leaned heavily against the desk. "My phone was destroyed after the accident." "What accident?" Marcus told her everything. The rehabilitation center, Walter's stroke, the car crash, months of recovery, the broken phone, the lost contacts, the returned mail. When he finished, neither of them spoke. There was no villain, no betrayal. Only tragedy layered upon tragedy until 2 people who loved each other had become strangers. Marcus looked toward the front of the shop again. "I keep thinking about all the ordinary days." "What do you mean?" "The mornings I could have walked her to school." "The birthdays." "The bedtime stories." "The scraped knees." "The nightmares." His voice grew quieter. "I wasn't there." "No, I can't ever get those years back." No. She spoke gently, but honestly. You can't. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. Another long silence followed. Finally, he asked the question he had been afraid to ask from the moment he saw Ava through the window. Does she know about me? Cynthia shook her head. I told her that her father loved making beautiful things. Marcus looked confused. You said that it was true. I thought you'd hate me. I did. She smiled sadly. For a while? What changed? I became a mother. He looked at her. And I realized that carrying hate every day is another kind of poverty. Marcus's eyes filled with tears he no longer tried to hide. Outside the office, Ava suddenly knocked gently on the glass. She held up a freshly folded blue swallow. Mom, Cynthia opened the door. Yes. I made one for the nice man. Marcus looked at the little paper bird resting in her small, outstretched hand. Without realizing it, tears slipped freely down his face. The daughter he had never known had just offered him the first gift she had ever made for him. She had no idea who he was. Yet somehow, in the quiet innocence only a child possesses, she had already begun showing him the grace he had spent 10 years searching for. Marcus accepted the tiny blue paper swallow with both hands. It weighed almost nothing, yet it felt heavier than every gold watch and diamond necklace he had ever held. Ava smiled proudly. I think the wings came out better this time. Marcus examined the careful folds as though he were studying a priceless work of art. They're perfect, she giggled. They're not perfect. They're perfect because you made them. The little girl seemed satisfied with that answer before returning to Noah's table to fold another bird. Marcus remained standing where he was. His thumb traced the delicate crease along one paper wing. He thought about the first gift he had ever made for Cynthia. The swallow pendant. Now, 10 years later, their daughter had unknowingly placed another swallow into his hands. Life had a strange way of speaking in symbols. When Marcus returned to the office, Cynthia had already gathered the old letters back into their bundle. Neither of them wanted to lose another piece of the past. Marcus placed the paper bird carefully beside Walter's leather design notebook. I don't even know where to begin fixing this, Cynthia answered quietly. You can't fix 10 years. I know. He looked toward the front of the shop again. But I have to do something. His eyes drifted to the wooden jewelry box still resting on the desk. The necklace. Cynthia nodded. I came here to sell it. Marcus closed the box immediately. No. She looked at him calmly. I wasn't asking for permission. I know. It's the only way I can pay the rent. Without another word, Marcus walked to his desk, opened a drawer, removed his checkbook, and began writing. Cynthia understood instantly. She stood before he finished. No. He looked up. Cynthia? No. He continued writing anyway. She gently placed her hand over the check. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I'm trying to keep you and Ava in your home. I know. So let me. She slowly shook her head. If you write that check today, she searched for the right words. I'll never know whether you came back because you love your daughter or because you feel guilty. Marcus stopped moving. The pen rested silently above the paper. I do feel guilty. I know you do. I missed everything. I know. I can't erase that. No. So, why won't you let me help? Cynthia took a slow breath. Because I've spent 8 years teaching Ava that people should stand on their own feet whenever they can. She looked directly into his eyes. If I abandon that lesson the moment life gets difficult, her voice softened, What exactly have I been teaching her? Marcus lowered the pen. For a long moment he simply nodded. He finally understood. This wasn't pride. It was identity. Everything Cynthia had built after believing she had been abandoned rested on one foundation: her dignity. If he crushed that foundation with easy money, he would only wound her again. I don't want to take that away from you, he admitted. I know. Another silence settled between them. Then Marcus asked carefully, "What if I help differently?" Cynthia didn't answer immediately. "I'm listening?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I know someone. A friend. The owner of Brookstone Artisan Bakery." Cynthia recognized the name instantly. Everyone in Cincinnati's baking community knew Brookstone. Its pastries appeared in hotels, weddings, and charity galas across the city. "They've been searching for someone experienced with artisan breads." She looked surprised. "How do you know?" "I repaired every clock in their cafe." A faint smile crossed his face. "They've been complaining for months that they can't find someone dependable." Cynthia folded her arms. "I already have a job." "You have 2 part-time jobs." She couldn't argue. "They're offering nearly double what Riverside pays." "Grace." The thought came immediately. "I can't leave Grace." Marcus nodded. "I expected you'd say that." "I owe her." "I know. So this isn't simple." "No." He thought quietly for a few seconds. "What if it doesn't have to be either or?" She looked at him. "I know the owner well enough to ask whether they need someone before sunrise." She frowned. "A morning shift?" "You could continue helping Grace during afternoon hours until things stabilize." Cynthia considered it. It wasn't charity. It was opportunity. Something she could earn, not receive. Marcus continued carefully. "I won't mention we're connected." "You wouldn't?" "No. I don't want anyone hiring you because they pity you." He smiled gently. "I want them to hire you because your sourdough is better than theirs." For the first time that day, Cynthia laughed. A real laugh. "You still exaggerate." "I actually understated it." She shook her head. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." Marcus reached toward the jewelry box again. "As for this," he slid it back across the desk, "it belongs with you. I still need the money." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then let me buy it." Cynthia stared at him. "You just said, 'I'm not finished.'" He opened another drawer and removed a printed agreement used for purchasing estate jewelry. "I'll buy the necklace at its appraised value." She remained silent. And I'll include one condition." "What condition?" "You alone have the right to buy it back." She looked at him uncertainly. "For the exact same price. No interest. No hidden fees. No deadline." He pushed the blank contract toward her. "If one day you want it back," he smiled softly, "it'll be waiting." Cynthia studied him for a long time. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't pity. It was a business agreement designed to protect something precious until she could reclaim it, almost like placing a family photograph in safekeeping. She looked at the necklace again, then at Marcus. "I'll have to think." "Take all the time you need," she almost laughed. "I have less than 48 hours. Marcus's expression fell. Right. The rent. The deadline hadn't disappeared simply because they had found each other again. Just then, Noah knocked gently on the office door. "Sorry to interrupt." Marcus looked up. "What is it?" "The owner from Brookstone Bakery is here." Marcus blinked. "What?" "He came to pick up the antique cafe clock." Noah smiled. "Talk about timing." Marcus and Cynthia exchanged a surprised look. Neither of them could have planned what happened next. Sometimes life quietly opened a door just as another seemed ready to close. And standing only a few feet away, waiting in the showroom without realizing it was a man who might change Cynthia's future, not because Marcus asked for a favor, but because destiny had decided that one extraordinary day was not yet finished. Marcus took a slow breath before opening the office door. "I'll be right back." Cynthia nodded. "I'll stay here." As Marcus stepped into the showroom, a tall man in his late 50s was examining an antique wall clock that had just been restored. He wore a navy wool coat dusted with autumn rain and held a leather folder under one arm. "David," Marcus said with a smile. David Reynolds turned around. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd hidden in the workshop all afternoon. I got distracted." "I can see that." David had owned Brookstone Artisan Bakery for nearly 25 years. Although the business had expanded into 3 locations across Cincinnati, he still visited each kitchen before sunrise every morning. His employees respected him because he knew every baker's name and had never asked anyone to do work he wouldn't do himself. Marcus carried the restored clock onto the counter. "It should keep perfect time now." David inspected it carefully. "I've never doubted your work." He signed the receipt before glancing toward the office door, where Cynthia could be seen sitting quietly, with her hands folded. "Everything all right?" Marcus hesitated. "Long story." David smiled knowingly. "The best ones usually are." There was a brief silence before Marcus spoke again. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something." David raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "You mentioned last month that you were still looking for another artisan baker. I've been looking for 6 months. No luck. 3 applicants exaggerated their experience. 1 disappeared after 2 days. Marcus nodded toward the office. "I know someone." David looked through the glass again. "The woman inside?" "Yes." "Family." Marcus paused. "Someone important." David noticed the careful choice of words, but didn't press further. "Can she bake?" Marcus laughed quietly. "Better than anyone I've ever tasted." "Everyone says that about friends." Marcus shook his head. "I'm saying it because it's true." David studied his face for a moment. "I've known you 15 years. You have. I've never heard you recommend anyone." "I know." David became thoughtful. "Bring her out." A minute later, Cynthia stepped into the showroom. She looked slightly uncomfortable, as though she had accidentally walked into a conversation she wasn't meant to join. Marcus made the introductions. Cynthia Robinson. David Reynolds. They shook hands. David noticed the flour still clinging faintly to the sleeves of Cynthia's bakery uniform. "You've come straight from work?" "Yes, sir." "Where do you bake?" "Riverside Bakery." David nodded with recognition. "Grace Miller runs a good shop?" "She does." "You've worked there long?" "Almost 7 years." David leaned casually against the display case. "So why are you here instead of finishing today's shift?" Before Cynthia could answer, Marcus spoke gently. "She's here for another reason." David looked between them. "I see." He didn't ask. Instead, he smiled warmly. "I've got a simple question." Cynthia waited. "If I walked into your kitchen tomorrow morning..." She nodded. "What bread would you bake first?" The question caught her completely by surprise. She expected to discuss resumes, experience references, instead, bread. Without thinking, she answered, "A country sourdough." "Why?" "Because it tells the truth." David folded his arms. "Explain." "If your starter isn't healthy..." She smiled faintly. "The loaf tells on you." Marcus couldn't help smiling. David remained expressionless. "What else? You can't rush fermentation?" "And..." You can't fake patience. David's eyes narrowed with interest. And, Cynthia continued, anyone can decorate pastries. But good bread asks who you are when nobody is watching. The room became very quiet. David glanced toward Marcus. You weren't exaggerating. Marcus simply smiled. David looked back at Cynthia. What time do you normally start work? 4 in the morning. What time do you finish? Usually noon. And then, I help wherever Grace needs me. David nodded slowly. I have an opening. Cynthia's heartbeat quickened. One position? Not exactly. He opened the leather folder. I'm opening an educational baking kitchen next month. She listened carefully. We'll train young adults who aged out of foster care. Marcus looked surprised. You never mentioned that. I wanted everything approved first. David turned back toward Cynthia. I need someone who knows baking. He paused. But more importantly, his voice softened. Someone who understands what it's like to keep going when life becomes unfair. Cynthia lowered her eyes. I'm not sure I'm qualified for that. I think you are. She hesitated. I'd still like to speak with Grace before making any decision. David smiled. Good. She looked confused. I was hoping you'd say exactly that. Why? Because anyone willing to abandon a loyal employer without a conversation, he shrugged gently, would probably abandon me the same way. Cynthia couldn't help smiling. I don't work like that. I know. David removed a business card from his pocket. My office. She accepted it carefully. Come tomorrow afternoon. I will. We'll bake together. She looked surprised. You mean, an interview? No? He laughed. If someone wants to work in a bakery. He pointed toward her hands. I'd rather taste their bread than read their resume. After David left, the shop became quiet again. Marcus closed the front door behind him. I didn't expect that. Neither did I. Cynthia looked down at the business card in her hand. I haven't felt hopeful in a long time. Marcus smiled gently. You looked different while talking about bread. What do you mean? You stopped looking tired. She thought about that for a moment. Maybe baking is the only place I forget everything else. I remember. He smiled. You used to say bread rises because someone believed it would. She laughed softly. I really said that. You did. And you made fun of me. I absolutely did. Outside, Ava suddenly ran into the shop carrying 2 paper swallows. I made another one. She handed one to Marcus. And one for Mom. Marcus accepted his carefully. This one has bigger wings. Ava nodded proudly. So it can carry heavier things. Marcus looked at the tiny paper bird for several seconds before asking, What kind of heavy things? The little girl answered as though it were obvious. Worries. Neither adult spoke. Sometimes children found words that grown-ups spent years searching for. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the shop floor, Cynthia slipped the business card into her purse beside the wooden jewelry box. The swallow necklace was still inside. She had not sold it. Not yet. For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, another possibility had appeared. Not a miracle, not charity. Simply an opportunity earned through years of quiet work. And although neither Cynthia nor Marcus realized it yet, the chance meeting with David Reynolds had done something even more important than opening a new career. It had given Marcus a chance to begin proving that this time he intended to stay, not with promises, but with patient, ordinary actions repeated one day after another. The drive home felt strangely quiet. Rain had stopped sometime during the afternoon, leaving the streets washed clean beneath a pale October sky. Cynthia Robinson walked beside Ava instead of taking the bus. Neither of them seemed in a hurry. Ava skipped a few steps ahead, clutching the paper swallow Marcus had carefully folded into a small envelope so it wouldn't be crushed. Mom. Yes. The man at the clock shop. Cynthia looked at her daughter. What about him? He looked at me like he already knew me. Cynthia's heart stumbled. He was probably just being kind. Ava frowned thoughtfully. It felt different. Children noticed things adults often overlooked. Cynthia reached for Ava's hand. Sometimes people remind us of someone they used to know. Ava accepted the answer, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. That evening after dinner, Cynthia sat alone at the kitchen table with David Reynolds' business card in front of her. Interview tomorrow. Rent due the day after. The swallow necklace still rested inside its wooden box. She had almost sold it. Instead, it now felt like a promise waiting for its next chapter. Her phone buzzed. The caller ID surprised her. Grace Miller. Cynthia? Hi, Grace. I've been worried. I'm sorry I left so suddenly. You don't owe me an apology. Grace paused. Something happened today. Cynthia smiled faintly. You could say that. Can you come by a little early tomorrow? Of course. I'd rather hear everything from you than guess. I'll be there. After hanging up, Cynthia looked across the room. Ava had fallen asleep on the couch, one paper swallow still resting against her chest. The sight reminded Cynthia of another evening many years earlier. Marcus sitting beside the Ohio River, holding a tiny sketchbook, drawing bird after bird until he found exactly the right curve for the swallow's wings. She quietly closed her eyes. So much time. The words disappeared into the silence. Across town, Marcus remained inside the workshop long after closing. Noah had gone home an hour earlier. The clocks continued ticking. Marcus sat alone at Walter's old workbench, staring at the blue paper swallow Ava had given him. He carefully opened his father's leather notebook. Between sketches of rings and lockets, he found a loose photograph. Walter stood beside a much younger Marcus. Both smiled proudly over their first handcrafted clock. On the back, Walter had written one sentence. The hardest repairs are never made with tools. Marcus had never understood those words completely. Tonight, he finally did. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over Cynthia's number for several seconds. Then he placed the phone back down. No, not tonight. She needed peace, not pressure. Instead, he opened another drawer and removed the original receipt for the swallow pendant. The yellowed paper listed every detail: hand-engraved, solid gold, custom hinge, private compartment, customer not listed. Walter had smiled when Marcus finished writing it years ago. You forgot the buyer. Marcus had laughed. I don't need to write her name. Walter nodded knowingly. No. You won't. Marcus carefully placed the receipt beside the paper swallow. 2 reminders. One from the past, one from the future. The next morning, Cynthia arrived at Riverside Bakery before sunrise. Grace was already kneading dough. Without looking up, she asked quietly, Coffee? Please. Grace handed her a steaming mug. Neither woman spoke until the first batch of bread entered the oven. Finally, Grace turned toward her. So, Cynthia took a slow breath. I found Marcus. Grace blinked. The Marcus? Yes. The father? Cynthia nodded. Grace slowly lowered the mixing bowl she was holding. I don't even know what to say. Neither did I. Cynthia told her everything. The necklace, the photograph, the letters, the accident, the lost years. Grace listened without interrupting once. When Cynthia finally finished, Grace wiped her hands on a towel. I owe that man an apology. Cynthia looked confused. For what? I've spent 8 years quietly disliking someone I'd never met. A small smile appeared. So did I. Grace shook her head. Life really is unfair sometimes. It can be. But, she pointed gently toward Cynthia, you're smiling differently today. Cynthia hadn't noticed. Am I? You still look tired. Grace smiled warmly. But you don't look alone anymore. Those words lingered in Cynthia's thoughts throughout the morning. Near noon, as customers slowed, Grace called her into the office. I've made a decision. What kind of decision? Grace opened a folder containing payroll records. If David Reynolds offers you that position, Cynthia started to speak. Grace raised one hand. Let me finish. She nodded. You have to take it. Grace. No. Grace smiled. You've given this bakery 7 honest years. I don't want to leave you. I know. And that's exactly why you should. Cynthia's eyes filled with emotion. I can't abandon you. Grace laughed softly. Who said anything about abandoning me? She leaned back in her chair. I already called David. You what? Grace grinned. He phoned this morning. Cynthia stared at her. You knew? He asked what kind of baker you were. And I told him the truth. Grace's voice became firm. I told him you're the best baker I've ever hired. Tears gathered in Cynthia's eyes. I also told him, Grace smiled proudly, that if he doesn't appreciate you, I'll gladly hire you back. The two women laughed through their tears. Then Grace reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folded envelope. One more thing. What is it? Your unused vacation pay. I forgot I even had vacation days. You never took any. Cynthia slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a check. It wasn't enough to cover the remaining rent, but when she quietly added the amount to the money already saved in her notebook, the number left to pay became dramatically smaller. For the first time in days, the impossible no longer looked impossible. It simply looked difficult. And sometimes Cynthia realized difficult was enough to keep hope alive. As she slipped the check into her purse beside the little wooden jewelry box, she touched the swallow pendant through the velvet cloth. She whispered almost without thinking, maybe you don't have to leave home after all. By the time Cynthia Robinson arrived at Brookstone Artisan Bakery that afternoon, the autumn rain had given way to bright sunshine. The brick building looked nothing like the cramped kitchen where she had spent the last 7 years. Large windows overlooked a small herb garden, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted onto the sidewalk before she even opened the door. She paused for a second, not because she was afraid of failing, because she was afraid of hoping too much. David Reynolds spotted her immediately. You made it. I said I would. I've already got flour waiting. He led her past rows of gleaming mixers into a teaching kitchen, unlike anything Cynthia had ever seen. Stainless steel tables stood beside shelves lined with jars of different grains, seeds, and natural starters. A chalkboard listed recipes in neat handwriting. 6 young adults were cleaning workstations after finishing a training session. David smiled. They're our first class. One of the students waved. You're the baker Mr. Reynolds told us about. Cynthia laughed nervously. I guess I am. We heard you make incredible sourdough. She looked at David. You've been talking. I've been telling the truth. Instead of handing her an application, David placed a bowl of flour on the table. No resume. No interview. No trick questions. He slid another bowl beside it. Show me who you are. Cynthia tied on an apron. For the next 2 hours, words became unnecessary. She measured flour without a scale, mixed water with patient hands, paused before adding salt, folded the dough instead of forcing it. Every movement carried years of quiet experience. The students slowly gathered around. "Why aren't you kneading harder?" one asked. "Because bread remembers how you treat it." Another looked confused. "What does that mean?" Cynthia smiled while gently stretching the dough. "Whoa? If you're impatient, you'll tear the gluten." She looked around the room. People aren't so different. The students exchanged thoughtful glances. David didn't interrupt once. He simply watched. When the loaves finally came out of the oven, silence filled the kitchen. Golden crust, deep caramel color, the unmistakable aroma of naturally fermented bread. David sliced the first loaf. Steam escaped into the room. He took one bite, then another. Finally, he looked at Cynthia. "When can you start?" She blinked. That's it. You don't need references." "I already called Grace." Cynthia laughed. "I should have guessed." David nodded. "She spent 10 minutes telling me I'd be foolish not to hire you." Emotion rose in Cynthia's throat. Grace had done far more than recommend her. She had opened a door. David extended his hand. "The position is yours." Cynthia shook it. "Thank you." "You earned it." "No." He smiled. "You've been earning it for years." As they completed the paperwork, David explained the position. The salary was nearly double what Cynthia currently earned. Health insurance began after 90 days. The schedule would allow her evenings with Ava. Most importantly, she would help teach the apprenticeship program twice a week. "I've never taught before." "You already did." She looked puzzled. "The students listened to every word you said." She smiled softly. "I didn't notice." They did. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Ellison stood inside his workshop staring at his phone. He had rewritten the same text message at least 12 times. "How's the interview too formal? Thinking about you today. Too personal. I hope everything goes well." "Better." Still not quite right. With a sigh, he locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Walter had always said that sometimes the kindest thing a person could do was allow someone else enough space to breathe. Marcus intended to honor that. Instead of calling Cynthia, he drove to Lincoln Elementary. School had just ended. Parents gathered outside while children ran toward waiting cars. Marcus remained across the street. He wasn't there to interrupt, only to watch from a respectful distance. Ava emerged carrying an oversized science project made from cardboard and colored paper. She struggled to balance it. Before Marcus could react, another little boy accidentally bumped into her. The project slipped from her hands. Cardboard planets scattered across the sidewalk. Several children kept walking. Ava knelt quietly and began gathering the pieces without complaining. Marcus instinctively took one step forward. Before he crossed the street, another child stopped. Then another. Within seconds, 4 classmates were helping Ava collect every planet. The little girl smiled. "Thanks." One boy shrugged. "You helped me with math." A little girl added, "And you shared your crayons." Marcus felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. Kindness had already begun returning to his daughter. Not because of anything he had done, because Cynthia had raised her that way. He remained where he was until Cynthia arrived. She hugged Ava, admired the repaired project, and thanked every child who had helped. Marcus watched the scene quietly before turning away. He didn't need them to see him. Not yet. That evening, Cynthia unlocked the apartment door with lighter steps than she had taken in months. Ava noticed immediately. "You got the job," Cynthia laughed. "How did you know?" "You smiled with your eyes." The same words Ava had spoken days earlier. Cynthia knelt and wrapped her daughter in a tight embrace. "I got the job." Ava squealed with excitement. "Does that mean we can stay here?" Cynthia hesitated. "Not quite yet." "But we're closer." They celebrated with frozen pizza and the last 2 cinnamon rolls Grace had sent home. It wasn't much, but somehow it felt like a feast. After Ava went to bed, Cynthia opened her notebook. She carefully added her unused vacation pay. Then she added the amount David had promised as an advance after her first week. The remaining balance looked painfully small now, still beyond her reach today, but no longer impossible. Just then, someone knocked gently on the apartment door. Cynthia opened it. Mrs. Helen Dawson stood in the hallway holding another folder. "I wanted to let you know." She paused after noticing the hopeful expression on Cynthia's face. "The bank approved 1 additional 48-hour extension." Cynthia stared in disbelief. "I don't understand?" Helen smiled faintly. "I explained that one of my tenants had just secured better employment." "You did that?" "I simply asked for a little time." Tears filled Cynthia's eyes. "Thank you." Helen shook her head. "Don't thank me yet." She smiled. "Thank me when you're still living here next month." As Helen walked away, Cynthia looked down at the notebook in her hands. 1 opportunity, 1 recommendation, 1 understanding landlord. None of them had solved her problems alone, but together they had given her exactly what she needed most. Not a rescue, a chance. 48 more hours. For the first time since the eviction notice arrived, those words sounded like hope instead of a countdown. Cynthia Robinson barely noticed how brightly the October sun shone as she walked Ava to school the following morning. The little girl held her mother's hand with one hand and a paper swallow with the other. "Mom." "Yes?" "Are we going to be okay?" Cynthia looked down at her daughter. She had asked herself the same question every day for weeks. This time her answer came without hesitation. "We're getting there." Ava smiled. "I knew it." "How?" "You smile with your eyes again." Cynthia laughed softly. "I guess I do." After leaving the school, she headed directly to Brookstone Artisan Bakery to complete employment paperwork and schedule her first week of training. David Reynolds greeted her with a thick folder and an even thicker stack of recipes. "I hope you like early mornings." "I've been working early mornings for years." "Good," he smiled. "Then you'll feel right at home." The meeting lasted less than an hour, but before Cynthia left, David handed her another envelope. "Your signing bonus." She looked surprised. "I thought you said the advance came after my first week." "I changed my mind." She immediately shook her head. "I haven't earned this." "You accepted the position." "I still haven't worked." David leaned against the desk. "Do you know why I started this apprenticeship program?" She waited. "When I was 19, someone hired me before I believed I deserved it." He smiled quietly. "They trusted the person I was becoming." He pushed the envelope gently toward her. "I'm doing the same." Cynthia hesitated for several long seconds. Finally, she accepted it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." He laughed. "Make great bread." As she stepped outside, she opened the envelope just enough to see the amount. Her breath caught. It wasn't extravagant, but when added to everything she had already saved, she finally had enough to pay every remaining dollar of the rent. She stood motionless on the sidewalk. For nearly a month she had been chasing an impossible number. Now, through honest work, accumulated savings, Grace's unused vacation pay, and David's employment bonus, she had reached it. No miracle, no wealthy stranger solving every problem, just many ordinary acts of trust joining together. The first person she wanted to tell wasn't Marcus. It was Ava. But before school ended, there was somewhere she needed to go. Ellison Timepieces. The familiar bell rang as she entered. Marcus looked up immediately. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he noticed something different. She was smiling. "You look like good news." "I have some." He stepped around the counter. What happened? I can pay the rent. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, not out of relief for the apartment, out of relief for her. You did it. We did it. He looked confused. She smiled. Grace. David. Helen. She paused. And you? Marcus shook his head. I didn't do anything. You opened a door? You walked through it. Cynthia looked around the quiet shop. You respected me enough not to solve my life. Marcus smiled gently. I was trying. You succeeded. Silence settled comfortably between them. It was no longer the painful silence of strangers. It was the quiet understanding of two people learning each other again. Marcus reached beneath the counter and carefully placed the wooden jewelry box on the glass. I've been thinking about this. Cynthia rested her hand on the lid. I don't have to sell it anymore. I know. She slowly opened the box. The little gold swallow lay exactly where she had left it. Marcus had polished it. The gold seemed warmer now, but otherwise nothing had changed. She looked up. You cleaned it. I couldn't help myself. She laughed. I noticed. Marcus hesitated before speaking again. There is one thing I'd like to ask. What is it? May I repair it? She frowned slightly. It's broken. No. He smiled. It simply deserves to be finished. She looked puzzled. Finished. Marcus walked into the workshop and returned with Walter's leather notebook. Carefully opening one page, he revealed the original design drawing. Beneath the swallow sketch written in Walter's handwriting was a note. Leave room beneath the wings. Finish only when the story is complete. Cynthia stared at the page. I've never seen this. My father wrote it after I made the pendant. Marcus smiled wistfully. He said some jewelry should grow with the people who wear it. He looked at the necklace. I always planned to engrave something beneath the wings one day. But we never had the chance. No. He met her eyes. Would you let me do it now? Cynthia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently placed the necklace in his palm. I'd be honored. Marcus carried it to the engraving bench. He adjusted the magnifying lens and picked up the same fine engraving tool Walter had once used. Every movement was slow, careful, intentional. Cynthia watched from across the workshop. Not a word was spoken, only the soft scratching of metal beneath skilled hands. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned. He didn't hand her the necklace immediately. Read it. Cynthia opened the pendant. Beneath the swallow's wings, in letters so small they almost disappeared into the gold, were the words, Home is the people who choose to stay. Her vision blurred. She read the sentence again, and again. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. I couldn't stay then. He swallowed hard. But if you'll let me. He looked toward the window where afternoon sunlight filled the shop. I'd like to spend the rest of my life choosing to. Cynthia closed the pendant gently. She didn't answer with dramatic words. She simply stepped forward and embraced him. Not because every wound had healed, not because every lost year had been forgiven, but because for the first time in a decade she believed the man holding her no longer made promises about returning someday. He had already returned, and this time he wasn't asking for another chance with words. He was earning it one ordinary day at a time. 1 year later, the first thing people noticed about Swallow and Wheat Bakery wasn't the bread. It was the laughter. Every morning before sunrise, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk while the scent of fresh sourdough drifted through the neighborhood. Parents stopped for cinnamon rolls before taking their children to school. Nurses grabbed coffee after overnight shifts. Elderly couples shared blueberry scones by the front window. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign carved by Marcus Ellison himself. Swallow and Wheat, Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just two symbols that had quietly changed 3 lives. Inside the bakery, Cynthia Robinson moved confidently from one oven to another, her apron dusted with flour, exactly as it had been years earlier. The difference was no longer in her work. It was in her eyes. The constant fear had disappeared. She still worked hard, sometimes 12 hours, sometimes more. But she no longer counted every dollar wondering which bill could wait another week. She planned new recipes instead. Near the front counter, Ava Robinson, now 9 years old, carefully arranged paper swallows hanging from nearly invisible strings across one corner of the bakery. Customers often asked why birds floated above the children's reading table. Ava always answered the same way. So nobody forgets that home can find you. No one realized those words carried an entire family history. Across town, Marcus's workshop had changed as well. Every Saturday morning, the repair benches that once served only paying customers became classrooms. Teenagers from foster care community centers and low-income neighborhoods learned how to repair clocks, engrave jewelry, and restore objects most people considered worthless. Marcus rarely spoke about second chances. He demonstrated them. Whenever a student accidentally scratched a piece of metal or broke a tiny spring, he simply smiled. Good. The teenagers usually looked horrified. I ruined it. No. Marcus handed them another tool. You started learning. Walter Ellison's old notebook sat open on the workbench every class. The first page still carried the sentence his father had written decades earlier. The hardest repairs are never made with tools. Marcus understood those words completely now. Some afternoons after finishing at the bakery, Cynthia stopped by the workshop with fresh bread for the students. She never interrupted class. She simply left baskets on the table before quietly returning home. The students eventually learned that the bread always arrived on Saturdays. None of them knew it was another small promise Cynthia and Marcus had made to each other. Whenever they had enough, someone else should too. One crisp October afternoon, the entire neighborhood gathered for the annual Riverfront Community Harvest Festival. Food vendors lined the streets. Children painted pumpkins. Local musicians played beneath colorful autumn trees. Swallow and Wheat had donated dozens of loaves to the community dinner. Marcus's students displayed restored clocks and handcrafted jewelry beside the bakery booth. Grace Miller stood proudly helping customers slice fresh pies. David Reynolds laughed while pretending to argue with children about which cookie disappeared fastest. Even Mrs. Helen Dawson attended carrying homemade apple butter she insisted everyone try. Looking around, Cynthia realized something extraordinary. Nearly every person who had quietly helped her during the hardest week of her life stood within sight of one another. Not because anyone had planned it, because kindness has a way of introducing people who never expected to meet. As the afternoon drew to a close, Ava wandered toward the fountain in the center of the square. The swallow pendant rested against her chest beneath a soft blue sweater. Marcus had returned it to Cynthia months earlier. On Ava's 9th birthday, Cynthia had fastened it around her daughter's neck. It belongs to our family, she had whispered, and someday you'll decide who needs its story next. Near the fountain, another little girl accidentally dropped a woven friendship bracelet into the shallow water. She searched frantically between the stones. I can't find it! People hurried past without noticing. Ava stepped forward immediately. Wait. She rolled up her sleeves, reached carefully into the cool water, and lifted the bracelet from beneath a smooth rock. There. The little girl smiled with relief. My grandma made this. Ava gently placed it into her hands. You should keep it safe. I will. The little girl hesitated. Thank you. Ava smiled exactly the way Cynthia always did. My mom says important things aren't always expensive. She glanced down at the swallow pendant for just a second. Sometimes they're just impossible to replace. The little girl hugged the bracelet tightly before running back toward her family. Marcus had watched the entire exchange from several yards away. So, he walked over beside Ava. You saw someone needed help. She nodded. I remembered. What did you remember? She looked up at him. That people come first. Marcus smiled. Your grandmother Evelyn would have liked hearing that. And Grandpa Walter, too. Marcus's eyes softened. Very much. Together they walked back toward Cynthia, who was waiting beside the bakery booth. Without saying a word, the three of them stood watching dozens of paper swallows turning gently in the autumn breeze above the festival tables. Some were decorations, some had been folded by children, some had been made by Ava herself. They danced together as though carried by the same invisible wind. Cynthia reached for Marcus's hand. He squeezed it gently. No grand speeches were needed. No dramatic promises remained. The family they had once dreamed about hadn't been built in the way they imagined when they were young. It had been built one honest decision, one act of patience, one ordinary day at a time. And around Ava's neck, beneath the wings of a small gold swallow, the tiny engraving caught the late afternoon sunlight. Home is the people who choose to stay. Life has a quiet way of testing what we value most. Sometimes we lose opportunities, relationships, or precious years through circumstances beyond our control. We cannot always change the past, but we can choose what kind of people we become because of it. Cynthia never allowed hardship to steal her dignity. Marcus learned that true responsibility begins the moment we stop making excuses and start showing up consistently. Neither of them was saved by wealth or luck alone. Their future was rebuilt through honesty, humility, forgiveness, and the kindness of ordinary people who each offered one small piece of hope. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that no act of kindness is ever too small. A recommendation from a friend, an extra day to pay the rent, a chance at a new job, a paper bird folded by a child, or a handcrafted necklace passed from one generation to another can become the turning point in someone's life. We rarely see the full impact of our compassion, but it often travels much farther than we imagine. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments where you're watching from, and tell us about a person whose kindness changed your life. Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about hope, family, and second chances, we'd be honored to have you subscribe and join us for the next journey.